Sometimes, if somebody dares you to do something, don't. You never know where a dare can take you, or what can happen. Especially if you take a dare on a dark night, around midnight. As a matter of fact, I dare you to listen to the story I'm going to tell. Double dare you to listen to it at midnight. Well, maybe you can, because it starts this way. Just a bunch of boys sitting around and talking and telling ghost stories, trying to scare each other. And they just happened to talk about an old man who had just died and been buried just that day. The old man never liked the boys, and the boys never liked him. And so they talked. One of the boys said the old man was so mean that if any of them sat on his grave, the old man would probably reach up and grab him. And one of the boys, his name was Jim, said that was just a lot of nothing. Even if someone sat on the grave at midnight, nothing would happen. One of the boys dared him to do just that. And Jim said it was silly. And then they all dared him. And what else could he do? He said he didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, so he took the dare. And to prove that he would do what they wanted him to do, he said he'd leave his jackknife sticking in the grave for proof. And that was that, until that night. At 11:30, a half hour away from midnight, Jim got out of bed, dressed, remembered to take his penknife, and carefully left his house. He didn't want to wake his parents because they wouldn't understand about going to a graveyard at midnight. And then, when he was outside, he remembered he had forgotten his flashlight. Oh, but it didn't matter. It was a bright, moonlit night. Just the sort of night to visit a grave, if you didn't want to be frightened. Even so, even if it was pretty light outside, Jim was afraid. Aafter all, he didn't really know too much about ghosts. He just didn't believe in them. But maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe there were ghosts. And he began to wish he hadn't taken the dare. But a dare was a dare. And he came to the graveyard. He opened the iron gate of the graveyard. The moon shone on the gravestones all around him, and they stood white, looking like ghosts. And he looked for the old man's grave. And just at midnight, he found it. He opened his jackknife, knelt down, and plunged it into the old man's grave. Nothing happened. It was after midnight. He had gone through with the dare, and he started to get up. But he couldn't. He couldn't move. Something was keeping him there on the grave. The old man? He didn't know. All he knew was that he couldn't move. The next day, Jim didn't show up at school. His friends wondered where he was, Probably out too late. They laughed about that. But after school, they walked over to the graveyard to see if Jim had left his knife where he said it would be. They found the knife. And they found Jim lying on top of the old man's grave. He had plunged the knife through his own coat and had pinned himself to the ground. He couldn't move. He had died of fright. Now, that's not very scary, is it? Or is it?